This episode of Shadowversity is brought to you by my stupendous, awesome, legendary supporters on Patreon. If you'd like to support Shadowversity on Patreon, visit patreon.com/Shadowversity. Swearing by swans, raising the dragon, marriage under a shroud, and thrushes on the ground? Is this the most historically accurate medieval movie I've ever watched? Holy crap!
Shadowversity.
Greetings, I'm Shad, and welcome to my review of Outlaw King, the recent medieval movie depicting the life of Robert the Bruce, or the latter, the fighting parts of his life, okay, that's recently been released on Netflix. Now, I have actually done a review of the trailer of this movie, and that got me quite interested in the movie itself, and I tell you what, after watching this movie, I'm not disappointed. It was really good and surprising, almost shockingly faithful to medieval accuracy. Does that mean it was completely accurate? No, it wasn't, but I actually think it might be the most accurate medieval film I've ever watched. And that's saying something. Well, I guess compared to some of the other attempts, it might not be saying much, but still, this is pretty darn good. I just need to pause here and add a disclaimer that this movie has a fairly significant content warning for both graphic violence and nudity. Seeing Chris Pine's privates is not something that I really needed in my life, but, well, there you go. So this isn't your traditional review. This is a review of the historical medieval elements of the film. So I won't really be looking at the dramatization and the acting, even though the acting was really good, particularly by some of the three main actors. So Chris Pine, I think this is his best role ever watching. Just a note on Pine, okay? I've always liked him as an actor, but I was worried that it was going to be the Chris Piney type of acting. You know, that kind of roguish charm that he brings into a lot of his films? That wasn't there, okay? He really played Robert the Bruce exceptionally well. You can't call it his breakout role, but like one of his best. By far. And then the actress that played his wife, I don't know their names, and the guy who also played Edward II, phenomenal work, like really, really well done. But in terms of the drama, the flow, the characterization, things like that, I'm not really going to be looking at that. No, historical accuracy here, and I'm going to start with the things that have impressed me, the accurate elements, and then I'm going to point out those inaccurate ones, because there was a couple, but overall, like I said, this movie has shown far more care and consideration to historical accuracy than really, I can't think of any other movie that's done this. So some of the broad things to touch on first. Overall clothing, okay, that they're wearing. Accurate to the period, and when it's appropriate that they would be, going around their normal lives and things like that, clean and colourful, okay? And then when you would expect to be dirty, it is dirty and stuff like that, because I was kind of trying to point out in the trailer reviews, like, is this the cliche where all the medieval people are covered in dirt and stuff like that? No, they're only covered in dirt when it's appropriate in the story that they would be. So, huge thumbs up, okay? There's no kilts anywhere because kilts didn't exist in this time period. And so, wow, okay. Weapons and armor. It's beautiful. It's just so beautiful. Mail everywhere. The main type of armor, as you would expect in this period. Then we have coats of plates, okay? The only, thing which is dubious is those weird goldy kind of pauldron things that Edward II is wearing. Alright, he's a prince, he wants to stand out and stuff like that. And this is the thing about this one. We can't say something like this has never happened, there's just no evidence for it, so it's, just very unlikely, but I understand why they did it for the context of the movie. Just, he is the supposed bad guy. That's the other thing I want to touch on. But I'll get to that when I'm talking about the possible inaccuracies and stuff like that. Who really are the bad guys and good guys? But for the context of a film, you want a hero and you want a villain. Okay, so that's why they've structured it that way. The weapons, alright? We do not see two-handed swords. Where there are swords, it's arming swords. And they are not overly represented in actual battlefield combat. What we're seeing on the battlefield, and in fact, the weapon that the Bruce himself uses in the final battle, is an axe. Good! That's what we would expect, because a sword is a very, it's not as effective as other weapons against the type of armor that exists today. Mail. You can chop someone for days while they're wearing mail, you're never going to chop through it, though there are some of those things, but this movie did far better in representing the effectiveness of armor, because there are actual hits that hit people when they're wearing armor, and it does nothing. Because they're wearing armor, thank goodness, but there are those times where the armor doesn't seem to be doing much. But yes, we see axes, we see hammers, we see pole arms, okay? And we see spears. spears. Thank goodness, spears. And also bucklers. Bucklers are in this movie. I mean, do you see why it's so beautiful? So let me go into detail about some of the accurate weapons and armor that we see here. For instance, riveted mail. We see heaps of riveted mail. We also see some butted mail. So, butted mail, bad. Riveted mail, good. Gambesons and surcoats are everywhere, which is just phenomenal and so accurate. I love it. We see proper padding under male coifs. In so many movies, we see male coifs sitting on their bare scalps. Look at his shield here. It is clearly covered in rawhide. Absolutely accurate. Now, having said all that, some things still might have slipped under my radar. For instance, I suspect some of these helmets to actually be of a later period, though someone who is a bit more versed in medieval armor would be able to confirm this, like the Metatron or Knight Errant. I really should point out that my enjoyment of the film, my, rating on the scale of, like, say, 1 to 10, it's clearly, muddled by the sheer moments of overwhelming joy I had in the movie when I saw something of pure historical accuracy, okay? That gives me an inordinate level of joy that perhaps helped me enjoy the film far more than I would have if I was just analyzing it for, say, the plots, the drama, okay, the suspense and other things like that. And so for someone just measuring it on those scales, they might give it a bit of a low one, but oh gosh, there was many, like when they Warwolf, they have Warwolf, like I pointed that out in the trailer review. Is that Warwolf? It is Warwolf, okay? Is it in the correct time period? Were they using it while they were making that council and stuff like that with the Scots? I don't think so. But of course it's a 2-hour movie, so they have to condense a lot, and that's one of the things I'll get to in the inaccuracies. I do need to make 2 retractions from my review of the trailer of this film, and that's when I criticize those weird kind of huts that are on the rivers, because I was like, oh look, they're just a crappy, fantasy village that they don't put much time into and stuff like that. No, it turns out those are fishing huts. They're not the actual homes that people are living in. For fishing huts, yeah, you would expect something that rough and everything like that. So okay, I withdraw that criticism, absolutely. Now, I also criticized the leather braces that you see in the trailer, and they are there in the film. This is a tricky one, because in terms of the type of leather braces you see that's only kind of like a cuff, fantasy, okay? But these were full forearm leather braces, and in that sense, okay, there is some evidence of that type of armor existing in the medieval period. As to its prevalence, I personally think it wasn't very prevalent at all, and so to err on the side of caution, to misrepresent its prevalence, I tend to say, look, just exclude it, don't worry about it. But it's not really an inaccuracy, okay? And it does look like legitimate, leather bracer armor, because their mail shirts only come down to their elbows and stuff like that, so I also withdraw that criticism as well. So if this movie was to only have gotten the clothing, weapons and armor correct to the period, well, already it's doing a lot better than many other films, but it doesn't stop there. There are some very specific, nods to historical accounts and historical, I guess, practices and traditions that floored me, really surprised me, and I'm going to point out what those were. The first one, raising the dragon banner. I was actually dubious when I saw this in the film.
What would you do, son?
I would raise the dragon, Father.
My son will raise the dragon banner. The codes of chivalry are ended. There will be no quarter.
Sounds a little bit fantasy-esque. I'm not sure about this, but it was referenced to more than once, and I did some research and I looked into it, and interestingly enough, there is historical grounds for this thing, raising the dragon. They said raising the dragon banner, and this is where it gets a little bit muddy. There's no evidence to indicate that there was an actual banner or a flag, okay? But there is a quote by Longshanks himself, and he said this in a letter that he sent to his general, Aymer de Valence, telling him to burn and slay and raise the dragon. In a certain book of history written by David B. Lawrence, I found a quote of him saying that the raising of the dragon banner or flag was a sign of giving no quarter. But other people have questioned the existence of that flag, but there is a general acceptance that the concept of raising the dragon was kind of synonymous with the term of going all out and showing no mercy, giving no quarter. And so in the film, yeah, they actually have that, because this was a quote by Longshanks, alright? right? And Longshanks is the one who says in the film to raise the dragon banner. And this is a very specific detail that they've included, but it's not the only one. There is a scene in the film depicting a feast where Edward II grabs two swans by the throats and says this:
"By these swans, I vow to avenge this murderous insult to God!"
Now, contrary to what many people think, I'm actually not an expert on all things medieval history, cultural, and otherwise, and I saw this and it looked pretty weird to me. But this is the thing, because it was so weird to my modern sensibilities and understandings of culture and things like that, I instantly thought, I bet that's a historically accurate element. And you can generally pick out the actual historical medieval tradition, stuff like that, generally by how strange they appear to us from our modern perspective. And so I looked it up, and sure enough, this is a historical thing. This actually happened. It was called the Feast of the Swans. I'll link to my references in the description below if you want to get more information on the Feast of the Swans or the Dragon Banner thing and stuff like that. So, well, alright, you know, I did my research here. The next surprisingly accurate detail, the marriage scene between Robert and Elizabeth. They are lying, you know, kind of face down underneath a shroud that's being held up above them. That looks to be a very accurate medieval wedding of the period, and again, you can generally pick these out by how strange they are to our own understanding and point of reference. Another surprisingly accurate detail that they depicted in the film was on the floor of the castles and the cathedrals. You see what looks to be hay or straw on the ground. Well, this is a nod to what we see in historical writings where thrushes are placed on the ground of a castle. So there's like one account where the Lord orders his servants to place down, you know, and fresh thrushes were placed down on the ground in preparation for some type of important visitor. As to how these thrushes were placed on the ground and why, we have no idea. It's kind of a mystery, and there's a lot of back and forth as to what type of thrushes. Some say that they're actually rolled up kind of bundles. Some say that they were thrush mats, okay, placed over the stone so it wouldn't be as cold and stuff like that. And then some think it's just thrushes strewn about in kind of a mess. And that is the way they show it in the movie, where it's just kind of thrown about on the ground, which was one of the first interpretations of thrushes on the ground. Well, it's just thrown them on. Other people are saying, no, it's probably maybe mats or something like that, and they just referred to them as thrushes. But the fact that this movie even goes so far to be accurate to this historical factoid is really, really impressive. So that right there, with all the other specific details that I just pointed out, in combination with the broader accuracy that they showed to the clothing, weapons, and armor of this period, this movie has shown more care and consideration to historical accuracy than any other movie I can think of. This is really impressive. So already, massive thumbs up. And like really, those specific details, like swearing by swans and raising the dragon, that's so specific, okay? This is why it's impressed me so much. Like, there are specific details that so many movies just ignore and get wrong, like Braveheart or Kingdom of Heaven. And so far from just ignoring specific details like that, this movie not only includes them, but almost highlights them with specific detail. So, well done, Outlaw King, Netflix, and everyone who worked on this movie. So impressed. Of course, that's not to say the movie is perfect. There are some crimes against, you know, medieval realism that I do need to point out, but this is not, they do not ruin the film for me. And a lot of them you can kind of see they're added in because of the constraints of the movie being limited to 2 hours. And so with that, you see the chronological order of things being a bit skewed and muddled. Like the last battle is actually a combination of 2 battles that happens chronologically, where the Battle of Bannockburn happened, and this is after the Bruce had captured most of the castles back, and then Edward II comes in with a very large army and stuff like that, and that, you know, where that is shown in the movie chronologically, that is the Battle of Bannockburn. But the battle that they show and even reference it being is the Battle of Loden Hill. The interesting thing about that, for a depiction of the Battle of Loden Hill, that was incredibly accurate to what, you know, Robert the Bruce actually did. And you can see why they chose to have the big final battle be Loden Hill over Bannockburn, because in the Battle of Loden Hill, Robert the Bruce employed a very clever strategy to overcome the English, and that played out beautifully in the film because they really really show that, and it was awesome. Like, the battle was great. Though I'm going to take a much closer look at the sword fighting and the final battle, and I'll do a full fight review, okay? But that's for another video. But yes, I'll come back to the final battle because there's a couple more things to mention, but I'm just pointing it out as reference to the fact that the timeline chronologically has been kind of crammed together and there's a couple of things mismatched. All right, so I want to point out a general inaccuracy that is more common just in films overall, and that is the fact of hero and villain, okay? Historically, it's hard to find a very distinct categorical hero and a full-on blown villain in every sense of the term, but in film, well, we want that. We want the protagonists to be heroic and infallible and all those things, and so they're depicted as being heroic and the people they're fighting as villainous. We know from accounts that Edward the Longshanks, Hammer of the Scots, was pretty brutal and full-on in battle, but as to him being a full-blown evil villain, not really that much. Like, no more than Robert the Bruce really was. Robert the Bruce and the Scots did some very brutal and savage things against the English in the fighting. And from the English perspective, Edward I was a pretty good king, okay? He protected their realm very effectively and was overall quite fair and just. But we need a villain in the film, and so, you know, I feel he's depicted in far greater, you know, evilness, and the Bruce far more noble. And this is where we come to, say, the murder of his main rival, John Comyn. I think I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. Okay, so in the context of the film, he really had no choice, okay? And so the Bruce had to kill him, but historically we have no idea if that was the case. Oh, and by the way, how they showed that in the film, like the no hesitation, just bored. That was pretty cool. Like, it helped establish the character of Robert the Bruce in the context of this film as a guy with full-on balls. Like, you don't mess with this guy. The other crime against medieval accuracy is fire arrows. There are two specific scenes in which fire arrows are used in a large amount. Let's just get rid of no more fire arrows, okay? Please. The next big inaccuracy, the size of these crenellations on this castle, which appears more often than not. I think they even use the same castle representing different castles in the film. But anyway, now, it's funnily enough, this is supposed to be a historical castle, like it's old, it existed for a long time and was in the medieval period. But you can know absolutely if a castle has crenellations like this, and, or of course, machiculations that are not real and they're sealed in, that is due to a modern day renovation, okay? Someone has fixed up this castle and added those in after the fact, because guaranteed, crenellations like that did not exist in the medieval period for a functional real castle. If you have a functional real castle, the merlons, which are the tooths in the crenellations, are as high as a person. They're supposed to give full cover. And look how puny these things are. They're pathetic. No! And so if this is a historical castle, those crenellations were added in after the fact, okay? Much, much later. That is not how this castle would have looked like in the medieval period.
We know you have the Bruce's wife and child. Hand them over and I spare the castle. No!
Spare the castle? Do they even know what castles were? I mean, with a force this size, they're not going to be able to take that castle. They have no siege equipment or anything like that. They'd be committing suicide. This castle is made out of stone. It is not going to have to worry about fire arrows at all. Even if those fire arrows actually worked, which most of the time they wouldn't, and they'd just be snuffed out the moment they're shot. So the fact that the people in this castle are so worried about this small force sort of thing, no. This is quite comical and also rather annoying, because later in the movie, it shows a very clever way and also a historical way in which castles were taken. Outside of just full-blown assault, which was almost suicidal, unless you had the right men, taking castles was extremely difficult. That's why castles were built. They were very effective at what they were meant to do. And so some of the ways in which you could take castles, talking about the easier ways or the more effective ways, aside from just starving them out, was trying to sneak in somehow and open them up from the inside. And this is what we see here. They're sneaking into the castle and they open the doors, just letting the attackers in. That is exactly the way you would want to do it, especially with the guerrilla-style warfare that Robert the Bruce was known for. Getting a castle to surrender with a few measly fire arrows, come off it. All right, this next part is not only a massive inaccuracy, but also just something that is profoundly stupid in the context of the film and story itself, all right? And it is bit of a spoiler, okay? Spoiler alert, skip this part if you don't want it. So, the final battle, Edward II gets to face off against Robert the Bruce. Now, I know they had this in to have the hero and the villain fight in this great battle and everything, and it's, you know, very engaging, enjoyable, and all that stuff. And of course, the villain loses. And this is why I'm torn about this as well, because the acting of Edward II in this scene is just phenomenal, and he totally traps himself, and it was just a really well done scene, drew me in, everything like that. But Edward is at the mercy of the Scots and Robert the Bruce, completely defeated, and they let him go. They stand there and let him run away. It's like, what? No! No! I mean, if Robert the Bruce honestly had Edward II at his mercy, they would have captured him 100%. And in fact, at the Battle of Bannockburn, which the English were defeated, okay, and Edward II had to flee, he was pursued by the Scots, who wanted to capture him. And so the fact that they just let him walk away is of the most profound stupidity from a tactical, you know, perspective. You're looking at this in a war, like, it's unbelievable. The reason why they put it in is that it's dramatic, and they wanted, you know, Edward to be so humiliated by his defeat that, you know, he had to run away in disgrace and cowardice and things like that. That's why I think that, and they wanted to fight, and if they have the fight, that means the villain's going to be defeated, and then honestly, how are they gonna, like, Edward wasn't captured historically then, so he needs to escape somehow, which means they kind of wrote themselves into a box with that scene, because they wanted to fight, but then Edward needs to escape, and so that's the problem. But historically, if he was at their mercy, even not even historically, just logically, okay, if the enemy was at their mercy after a battle, they would have captured, they would never have let him go. My goodness, that ransom, that could have, you know, ended the war right then, just for his release. I mean, my goodness, the importance of capturing the King of England. But so, like, that is the most stupid point in the whole film, which is annoying because the film overall is just brilliant. But that reel is like, oh, come on, guys. So anyway, that is the last part, okay, last inaccuracy that I will point out. Yet, overall, the movie is awesome, like surprisingly respectful to the historical period and events. I was shocked. I was surprised, thrilled, and overjoyed at it. I give it a 9 out of 10. But again, I'm clearly getting, you know, unfairly influenced by my inordinate joy of seeing all these accurate elements in it. But still, oh, awesome. Okay, so there we go. This has been my review of The Outlaw King. Check it out. Definitely worth a watch. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you for watching. I hope you have enjoyed. And of course, I hope to see you again. So until then,